I grew up on two sides of the George Washington Bridge. Half my life I lived in New Jersey. The other half I lived in New York on Sullivan Street in Greenwich Village with my dad, Vincent Gigante, the boss of the Genovese crime family. And I was born in Manhattan. And my family lived in a 4-room apartment with 2 German Shepherds. By the time I was 6 months old, my dad decided to move us out to New Jersey. And my mom was able to choose from whatever houses she wanted. We ended up moving to Old Tappan, New Jersey, which is probably the best thing that ever happened, because my dad, being who he was the head of the Genovese crime family in Manhattan, but he was also the head of the commission. And that being said, there was a lot of insurmountable things that the family had to go through to get him to where he was in the end. So we were 5 children. Me being the youngest, I came 10 years after the youngest child, which was my brother. And for me, I was a change of life baby. Nobody expected me. My dad, he didn't want any more children. And when my mom got pregnant, he was like, oh my God. But, here I am. And I am the change of life baby in the sense that I was able to see things from a different perspective than the rest of the family. They were so much older, and they were already brought into my dad's world in the sense that if my dad asked them to do something, they would do it for him. So my sisters and I were to take care of my mom, mostly me at the end, because again, being the youngest, as an Italian Catholic child, when I grew up, this is what you did. You took care of your own. So I think I heard, my dad's last words to me and his first words to me were, take care of your mother. So that was my job here, right? But I had ideas of my own. And I was the renegade. I didn't want to be a part of that world. I loved my dad, but I knew at a very, very young age something was not right. I didn't know what he did until I was about 16 years old. But at a very young age, children know things. They don't necessarily know how they know, but they absolutely know that there's something not right, and I knew it. I grew up knowing never to speak or ask questions, or I would ask my sister, but never my dad. But my first experience with my dad at a very young age, I was 5 years old. I was underneath my grandmother's, we had a 4-room apartment, but the dining room table was huge. And I was under there playing, and nobody knew where I was at the time because, it was just a 4-room apartment. My grandmother and my mother were outside, and they were either shopping or whatever. And I was under the table, and there was Italian music playing in the background. And all of a sudden, I hear this ruckus, right? And I hear men, and I hear... Now, my father, when I tell you my father spoke, below a whisper, that's how it was for him. But not at that time because he was very young. But he really didn't say much. And I hear the ruckus, and I hear them bringing in a man who they were about to beat him. And so I crawled up to the farthest part of the dining room table, and I just sat there waiting. And I can hear the Italian music in the background. And all of a sudden, I hear the punches. Boom, 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 like one right after the other. And the guy hit the ground. And then I see my father's hand. And the only reason why I know is because he would wear this pinky ring. And I knew it was his. So I just watched him beat him. And at some point, the man's head turned my way. And I see his eyes were almost like half mast, like he was going out, right? And then all of a sudden, the blood. And the blood started to trickle to me, like to my feet. And I started to shake uncontrollably, but I didn't say a word. I didn't want anybody to know I was there. And I just stood there until it was over. And the last thing I remember is my dad stepping on this man's face and saying in a very low tone, "I'm done with him. Get him the fuck out of here." And then they bodily picked him up and took him out. And then my mother and my grandmother came back, and they were like, "Well, where is she? Where's Rita?" And they found me underneath the table, and my mother dragged me out. I'm crying and shaking uncontrollably. And she's trying to tell me that everything is okay. Daddy just got mad, you know. They're telling me all the things you would try and tell a kid. And in that moment, I shut down, my whole body shut down. And I was petrified of my father after that. I had this feeling that if I did anything wrong, somehow I was going to be hurt that way or killed even. That was in the back of a 5-year-old mind. Not too long after that, my anxiety attacks began. And I would be afraid to go to school. I didn't want to leave home. I didn't want to leave my mother. So I would stay home constantly. I was falling behind in school. I realized today, like after everything, I'm like, how did they even like get me to the next grade? They got me to the next grade because of who my father was. It wasn't like they were going to hold me back. So, but what that did to me was, I'm in high school. When I hit high school, I have a 6th grade reading level, and I can't get my grades to where they need to be. So that being said, by the age of 7, I went through another traumatic experience with a crossing guard who was an old man. If he was in his 80s, he just seemed very old, and he was Italian, and he would speak Italian because I would walk back and forth to school. And I understood some of it, but I didn't speak it. But one day he groped me, from behind. And, he did it in a very disgusting way. And he was speaking in Italian. And I ran home and I told my mom. And, I'm 7 years old. And I told my mom, I said, he touched me, I said, and I don't feel right about it, and I'm hysterical crying. And I said, what are you going to do? Like, I wanted to know what she was going to do. And she basically just took me by the shoulders and she said, "Okay, you're not going to walk to school anymore," she said, "but I can't tell Daddy about the man." And I said, "Why?" I said, "He hurt me, and she said to me, "Because I don't know what he would do to him." And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "He needs to do something to him. Like, somebody stick up for me." Like, I had no voice at that moment, And she said, "No, we can't." She says, "I don't want the man to get hurt." And I was so angry at that point. I was like, fuck this. And I was like, this is just not right. Nobody's hearing me. My voice isn't heard. After that, I started to get panic attacks. Now, I am a psychic medium and healer. What nobody understood back then was that I was an empath. And an empath is somebody that can feel everything and everyone around them. So I was carrying my mother's anxiety and depression. I was carrying my father's fears and whatever anxieties he was having. My sisters and brothers. I couldn't tell the difference between my own and theirs. So I would consistently try and help my mother because I could see that she was struggling with the fact that my father was who he was. There was nothing she really could do about it. And she would go into these deep depressions. And so I would take her energy and try and help her. And then I would go into deep depressions myself. And throughout the course of my life, it became anxiety, panic attacks. By the time I was 10, OCD entered, obsessive compulsive disorder. I imagine, now I realize I created that because I needed a way to feel like I was in control of something. So it would be struggling every day to pick out a shirt because one didn't feel right, because somebody was going to die if I picked out the wrong color or the wrong pair of pants or whatever. I deprived myself of things that I loved. Peanut butter. I couldn't eat peanut butter for the longest time because if I did, somebody in my family would die. you know? So, but I realized as I got older and looking back, it was just a way for me to cope. And it was fabulous because it, in my opinion, it kept me from going, quote unquote, crazy, right? So as I got older, I would see what was going on in my grandmother's apartment. I was 10 years old watching a group of men sit around that table. You know, everything was on. Cartoons were on, always cartoons. He had to have the cartoons on. The radio was playing, and there would be, you know, they were writing either notes back and forth to each other. Somebody would get up and whisper in his ear. And I'm watching this whole thing, and I'm going, who is he? Like, I don't understand, and I'm never allowed to ask questions, so I'm trying to figure out who he is. I'm listening one ear to him. I'm listening the other ear to the, you know, to the, to the cartoons. And then, you know, in the end of everything, he would give the orders, whispering. The phone was always off the hook. Phone was never on the hook. And, you know, we had those old rotary phones back then. He never spoke on a phone. So in 40 years, until he went to jail for the last time, his voice was never on a phone. So he would whisper to them. All the papers got torn up. They either got burnt or they got flushed down the toilet. Everybody would get up. Everybody went and did what they had to do, whatever he told them to do. End of story. As I got older, again, in my head, I'm questioning, he's important. He does these things that I don't understand. But now we're at a point where he's gone up in the organization. So Vito Genovese was somebody that absolutely adored my father. And he was the head of the Genovese crime family at that time. When my father was 16, at that time you weren't allowed to box, but this man took my father under his wing. And of course he put him in the boxing ring, and he made money. And he saw how my father could, you know, take care of himself and be an enforcer if he needed. So that didn't last very long because he had several fights, my dad. Maybe he had 25 fights, and he won almost all of them. But the idea was Vito had him at that point. And my dad came, listen, my grandma and my grandfather were immigrants, okay? They came off the boat from Italy. My grandmother in Italy had money. They had status. Her father was a doctor and a pharmacist. My grandmother was following in his footsteps, okay? They had servants. They were very well-to-do. She left all of that to come here with my grandfather, who was an ill man at the time, okay? She got here. They had nothing. She became a seamstress. He was a jeweler, okay? So my father grew up with not a lot of money, and my mother too. No money. Holes in their shoes, everything. So growing up like that, my father was looking for a way to make money. Boxing was one of them. He did work a couple of jobs, but when Vito got a hold of him, that was it. It was like, you're coming with me. So he became his driver. And then at one point, Vito took him in and said, okay, you know, this is going to be a way that you get ahead. And this was the Costello shooting. Okay, my father had to go and prove himself. So he was supposed to kill Costello. And in the process, he misses. Okay. And so anybody who misses normally, they're dead the next day, okay? But Vito loved him. And so my father stayed alive. They went to court. Of course, Costello said, I don't know who it was. Costello retires, and my father gets brought up in the ranks once again. And so then he goes to jail with Vito. Vito dies in jail. My father comes out, and slowly he becomes who he is, the head of the crime family. But he always has somebody in front of him saying that they're him, you know, meaning that they're really the head, but my father's in the background being protected. At a certain point in time, my father, you know, is being, I want to say, the FBI is all over him, right? So at some point he decides, because he never wanted to go back to jail again after the first time, he decides he's going to create a persona of himself that he's crazy, paranoid schizophrenia. Quite honestly, he could have won an Academy Award. He did it so well. People believed him, his own doctors believed him, but I'm sure some of them were paid to believe, so to speak. And he would check himself in and out of mental hospitals when he thought that the FBI was really close to him. And so, backtracking a little bit, now I'm, let's say, 16, right? And I'm hearing all these stories about him, people in school, because we live in this New Jersey, suburban area. And so there were people that weren't allowed to hang out with me, kids that weren't allowed to hang out with me. But there was also families that were gracious and that we connected to. My father lived with us for a year, because I was 6 months when we moved out. He lived with us for a year. We gave the police department a donation for $50. My sister actually went and gave them the check and said, this is a donation from our family. They took it as a bribe, arrested him and my mother. And in that moment, my father said, I'm going back to the city. I'm going to go live with my mother. So in that moment, he knew things had to change. And so now he's starting to wear a bathrobe, slippers, PCAP, walking the streets, talking to parking meters, talking to himself. And I'll never forget him saying to me, he'd come in, when we'd come to visit, he'd come in and say, come on, we're going to walk. Now, he was very afraid to, never got hit by my father, never really even got yelled at by my father. Because of my anxiety and my panic attacks, he was very, very leery of reprimanding me in any way. So he would take me to what they called the cafe, which is where he played cards and he had his business and all that. So he'd say, come walk with me. Now the man was almost 6 feet tall. I'm 5'1". He says, so he would, he'd go through the whole thing of his hair, it was messed up, put his PCAP on, the whole robe, slippers, everything.
It was all an act?
All an act, all an act. And part of me giggled, when he did this, because I watched him get into that, that character, I'll say, right? So he'd say, come on, we're going to walk. And then as we got outside, he'd say, come on, hold me up, he said, make like you're holding me up. And I'm thinking, if anybody's taping us, if anybody's looking at us, he's 6 feet, I'm 5'1", like how am I holding him up anywhere, right? So there would be people that would be passing us and tipping their hat because they knew him. So out of respect, they would tip their hat. There were others that would walk by and give us the look like, what is this, And I'd be like, in my head, I'd be like, mind your business, that's my father. So there was that piece of me that was my father, and I loved him. And there was the other piece like, fuck, why do I have to do this? Like, I'm not comfortable doing this, And we'd get to the cafe and we'd sit down and I'd watch him play cards. And I want people to understand that there were sides to my father that nobody really knew, okay? Everybody thought this was a glamorous lifestyle and that we all lived high on the hog. And it's just not true. We suffered dearly for what he was involved in. So before I actually found out who he was and all of that, I would be hearing these things in school. People would say, oh, there's the mafia princess, her father this, her father that. To the point where one day there was this one particular girl who was spreading big time rumors. And I just had enough. Even though I didn't know the truth, I really had enough of everybody talking about me. And so I grabbed her one day in the stall of the bathroom in my high school, and I just beat the shit out of her. She came out of the stall. Both her friends went in with her. I had a friend that was watching, and she came to me and she said she's in the bathroom. I come into the bathroom. Both those girls were in the bathroom. I said, get out. like that. Now, she heard my voice. I'm waiting for her to come out of the stall. And she came out of the stall, and she said, like she was acting very cocky. And I says, you know, I've had enough of you making fun of my family or saying things that, and she kind of went to come at me a bit, and I just took her down. I wrapped my hand around her hair. I pulled her down, and I hit her here on the sink of the bathroom. And interestingly enough, in that moment, I went to go hit her again, and I stopped myself. And my friend, Michelle, came in, and she said to me, somebody's coming. And I said, all right, I'm done with her. And those were the words my father said, right? I didn't even realize this till after the fact. So I didn't like myself after that. I didn't want to be that person, that person that was, you know, yes, I was sticking up for my family. Yes, she probably deserved the beating, but I didn't want to conduct myself that way. I'm not that person. So at 16, at that point, I was 16. At that point, I said, I got to find out what's going on. Because now I'm starting to believe things that I don't know if they're true or not. So I go to a family friend, and I'm sitting down with her, and I said, please tell me what's happening. I said, I need to know. This is what just happened to me. I have blood all over me. So she said to me, you don't know? I said, no. And she said, sit down. And she explained everything to me, who my father was, what he did, all of it, including that he was the head of the commission. And if you could have saw my face, everything drained right out of me. But in that moment, it was like all the pieces of the puzzle snapped into place. And I said, son of a bitch. In my head, I'm going, this is why I have such anxiety and panic, and I'm out of my body half the time. I can't, you know, I'm trying to stay grounded, and I can't. Little did I know I had these gifts that were coming, right? And nobody in my family understood that. Nobody. But my grandmother, she did have visions, okay, which I found out afterwards. So they don't know what to do with me. I go in and out of these depressions, can't eat for weeks on end, losing weight, the whole thing. But every single time it happened, 3 weeks later somehow, by the grace of God, I get an urge to have McDonald's. I don't know why it was McDonald's, and I don't know why it was Chinese food, right? I would go to McDonald's, I'd get 2 big, French fries and a shake, and I would be dipping the fries in the shake because I happen to love sweet and salty. My appetite would open, and then I would come back to normal again. But there's several pieces of the story. So at age 11, I knew I was gay, right? I felt it in my bones. I knew it. I was never going to be with a man. I was never going to get married like I was expected to do and have children. I would certainly take care of my mother because I was groomed for it from the day I was born. So at 11 years old, I'm holding a secret now. Now my father's got a million secrets, right? He is who he is. He's lying to everybody. He's lying even to us for certain things, right? He goes and he has another family on top of all of this. So this is what happens in that lifestyle, though. I want everybody to understand. This is what happens in that lifestyle. So he has, we'll call her a paramour. He ends up having 3 children with her. All very close to my age, 1 2 years older, one only 6 months apart. So she and my mother was pregnant at the same time, 1 2 years after me. Gets better. Both those women's names were the same name, Olympia. How that happens in this lifetime, I don't know. How many Olympias do we know? I know one. My mother and Olympia Dukakis is the only other one I know. But both names are Olympia. So obviously he can't make a mistake, whoever he's talking to or with. So he has this other family. Now my mother knows. My mother only confides in my sister, who's 15 years old. My sister had to bear a lot because she was the oldest. And so my father confided in her and my mother confided in her. None of us knew until later on in life. He kept it under wraps and absolutely nobody knew. So this is why my mother was so depressed and angry and upset. So moving through that piece, at 19, I decided I'm going to try and come out to my mother and my father. I got myself together. I'm at my mother's house. He comes to visit. He came to visit every so often in New Jersey. I got the balls to go into the room, into the bedroom, sit them down, sweating like an animal, my palms, everything, shaking like a leaf. And they looked at me like, what's wrong? And they said, I have to tell you something. And I said, I'm gay. I said, I like women. And I thought immediately I thought my father was going to get up and crack me, right? I just thought that was it. I got the complete opposite, which scared me more. Because my mother looked at him because she was like, I don't know what to do with this. So he just looked at me and he said, a lot of kids your age, 19, a lot of kids your age go through this. This is just, something you go through. He said, you're experimenting. It's okay. He says, you're going to get married. You're going to have kids. He says, but I'm going to tell you, he says, I don't want you to hang out with these girls anymore that you hang out with. Now, in an Italian Catholic family, you couldn't hang out with boys or girls, in mine anyway, because now I'm gay, right? So I was never allowed to really date men, but I wasn't allowed to hang out with my girlfriends either. I get up, back in my room, hysterical crying. 2 days later, I'm sick as a dog. Now, I'm sick often with upper respiratory, okay? Whether it's pneumonia, whether it's, the whole thing with my throat, my ears, everything. Now, for some of you who don't know what I do for a living, being a psychic medium healer, this area, which we call the throat chakra, okay, which is energy, but it's called the throat chakra. This is the area where you speak your truth. I tried, and I had to jump right back in the closet. So because I had to still lie about everything, I was getting ill from it. At the age of 24, I said, I'm done. I told my mother, this is who I am. This is who I'm always going to be. This is how I was born. And graciously, my mother said to me, we're not going to tell your father. I said, I don't care. I said, but I'm telling you. And she said, listen to me. She goes, I love you. I'm afraid for you because of the way the world is. And I'm afraid for your soul because she was Catholic, right? And I said, listen to me. This is how I was made. So there's no God that made me this way, I'm explaining to her, that doesn't love me and doesn't want me to be who I need to be. I said, I made peace with it. I need you to make peace with it. And she did. She made peace with it. So I started to live my life. At 19, I put myself in therapy. They didn't put me. They didn't say go to therapy. I put myself in therapy, okay? And the first time in 19 years, well, first I was told, make sure you don't talk about the family. Just talk about your anxiety. Not the fact that my anxiety was for my family, but, they thought just talk about the anxiety. Okay, I go to therapy. And I'm drilling the therapist on, if I tell you certain things, does that mean you're going to can you tell other people? Can you go to, the police? Can you go to the FBI? She doesn't even know what I'm going to say yet. And she's reassuring me that it's private, confidentiality, right? After 3 visits of drilling her, I finally say, okay, this is what it is. And I told her who my father was and what the situation was. And she just looked at me with deer, headlights, deer in a headlight. And I just said, is this something you can handle? And she said, absolutely. And all of a sudden, it was like 1,000 pounds came off of me. To be able to just speak it to someone who didn't say to me, no, you can't talk about this. No, this is wrong. No, this is going against the family. No, 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 no. It was yes now. And that began the healing process for me. And so I do want to tell people, and I always do this in any interview I have. My father wasn't all bad. I'm going to tell you that there were times where he was actually a human being in the sense that he was a dad, okay? He would, when I was sick, I would lay on his lap and he would rub my back and my head until I fell asleep. He would take care of that whole, part of New York that he ran, the whole village, the West Village. If the elderly couldn't pay for their rent or food, my dad paid for it. He was very generous in that way. He was extremely charismatic. He probably could have been the CEO of any company, that he could have created, but he got caught up. And when he understood the power behind what he was doing, he couldn't give up the power. It was never, ever about the money for him. It was always about the power. Now, I really am the only one in this, out of us children, who could get him up and dance to Elvis because he loved Elvis. So there were times where I'd be in my grandmother's, we switched apartments now, we were on LaGuardia, and I'd say to him, come on. I said, I'm going to put Elvis on, let's dance. And he would, 2 left feet, couldn't dance for shit. But he would get up and he would shimmy and do all of that. My mother would get up and shimmy. He'd come out of character for like 10, 15 minutes. And then after that, he'd go right back into it. Now, I witnessed him in character. I've witnessed doctors coming to check him out. And, him, speaking in a way, mimicking the cartoons and saying, God told me to do this and God told me to do that. And, he was my God. I would have to turn and laugh because it was funny in some sense, and in the other sense, I'm like, this is just insanity. And then when he'd check himself in to the mental hospital, he was on the 3rd floor with the people that were very ill. They had bipolar, they had schizophrenia, all of that. And we would go, and my energy, because I'm an empath, would pick up everybody's energy. Within 10 minutes of being in the room with him, I'd fall asleep because I couldn't handle it, okay? But I think that hurt me the most because, and it's not that the murders weren't, yes, that was definitely, it hurt me as well, but I'm watching him make a mockery of the actual people that were really ill, And they would come in, give him his pills, and he would, I don't know how he did it, but he was able to hide the pills that they were giving him for apparently the mental stuff. They would leave the room, he would open his mouth, show them that he swallowed it. They would leave, he'd spit it out in a, tissue, give it to my mother and say, take it home and flush it. So these were 3-week stints that he would go in for. So as time went on, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I did a lot of part-time jobs, I did a lot of things, but I knew I wanted to help people. I didn't know how, I just knew I had to help people. And so I decided, after doing a million things, I'm gonna go to massage school. I was working for a chiropractor at that time, and I was just working the office, like doing whatever he told me to do. Even massage people, and I didn't even know that I could do that. And I was also a personal trainer at the time. It was the first time in my life I made my own money, and I felt good about myself. So from there, I went to massage school. Now, when I got to massage school is where I really realized I had gifts, because I was able to put my hands on someone and feel what was going on inside their body. I could see the liver, I could see the kidneys, I could see the stomach, everything. And I would hear these things in my head saying, okay, they have an issue with their kidneys, they're gonna need to do this, this, and that, blah, blah, blah. I didn't know who was speaking, it wasn't me, but it was my voice, but I just knew it wasn't coming from me. So I would tell the person, listen, I don't know if this is true, but this is what I'm hearing. And they would look at me like, oh my God, how did you know that? And I'm like, oh God, what did I do here? Like I don't even know how I'm doing this. I said, I don't know, I just have a knowing. Now a knowing in my work is called claircognizant. Clairsentient is where I can feel stuff, okay? So get through massage school, I begin to work on people immediately. I'm helping people heal themselves in multiple ways, not knowing how, until I reached the point where I have my own visions. Now, I was raised Catholic, but I no longer practice Catholicism, and I haven't for a very long time. Someone asks me, I tell them I'm spiritual. But I did have visions. I've had visions of Christ. I had visions of Mother Mary. And these all were able to get me to the place that I needed to go with my work. The more I cleared out my own energy, the more I was able to do this other work that I was doing. So in other words, the more I cleared out my old family stuff and all the drama and all the craziness that went on there, the more energy I had to do my work. So as time went on, I was able to then focus on that piece. And also I was trained by several people to, I want to say, cultivate my psychic senses. So then I was able to see and hear things. Sometimes I could taste and even smell, depending on who I was working with. So that was a real blessing for me. It got me to the point where now I was helping people. Yes, this was here on the side, but I was no longer now as connected as I was before, okay? And no one could understand it. They just didn't understand what I was doing, how I could do it. They didn't believe it, really, you know? So one day I worked on my mom. She was not feeling great, and I was practicing one of the skills that I had, and it was called the laying on of the hands. And I said to her, I said, stand here. I said, let me try something, I said. It was something emotional that was going on with her. And I said to my niece, stand behind her. And I put my hands on my mother. My mother went down immediately like a feather. She just got limp. And she felt an incredible peace come over her. And she said to me, what was that? And I said, that was you releasing and spirit coming through you. They took it, and now you have your own energy back. She was blown away. She said to me, this is what you do for people? I said, yes. I said, but I don't do it. I said, everybody does it themselves. I said, you trusted me. So it happened. I said, when I'm working with somebody, I tell them, this is between you and spirit. I'm just a conduit. I said, and then if they want to heal, they heal. You know, it's like leading the horse to the water, but you can't make them drink, right? At that point forward, my mother was like, believed everything I did, said, didn't matter. And then slowly my family started to understand it. I should say my sisters. I don't really speak to my brothers at this point. Well, one of them I'm starting to, but after I wrote my book, they were not happy about it. So 15 years before I wrote the book, Spirit came to me and said, you're going to write a story, going to write your story. Start to write things down now. It will not come out for a while, but it's going to come out and you're going to help the masses. So I always ask that. How can I help the masses? I said, okay, so I started writing my story. I just took I went from just one experience, took that, wrote about it, and just kept going. 15 years later, I'm introduced to a woman who is going to help me now put it all together. And it took about 2 years to actually write. And it was extremely cathartic. But it was extremely exhilarating because I knew that when people read it, that it was going to help them somehow. There were so many aspects to it. The fact that people could relate, anybody could relate to, I don't care what you are, Jewish, Italian, whatever it is, you can relate to the family dynamics, right? You can relate to the fact that I was gay and I couldn't come out. You could relate to the fact that the women in my home were suppressed, not the men, okay? And they benefited, the men benefited, although my brothers were never made, ever. My father would never allow that. So it comes time where I'm on my own and my father's he gets arrested, he's in jail, he's going in for 12 years, okay? So my life is, I'm living with a woman, I have my own life, I have my own business, I'm thriving at this point. But the one piece that's missing is me making amends with my father, because I didn't know if he was going to die in jail or not. I didn't know if he was going to make it out. And I kept asking Spirit, show me how to forgive. Show me how to forgive all of them, not just him, my mother, you know, the whole family, the whole dynamic. I said, I want to be rid of this because I want to be healthy. And so I kept asking. And one night I woke up in the middle of the night in a sweat. And I run downstairs, and all of a sudden I feel the energy coming through me, and I start typing a letter to my father. This was the piece that brought him to where he needed to be before he passed. So I wrote him a forgiveness letter. And I said to him, I know you don't know me fully, but this is who I am. And I told him who I was. And I said, I'm sorry if I wasn't the daughter you expected. And I forgive you for not being the father you were or should have been. And blah, blah, blah. And it went on and on. This you can read in my book. And so he gets the letter. I had no expectations. I sent it. I felt 1,000 times better. Again, more weight lifted off of me. 2 weeks later, my mother calls me. She goes, what did you write to your father? I said, why? She goes, he called here basically in tears saying to me, he understood. He knows what you mean, and he gets it. I said, I'll let you read it. And I let her, you know, I was home. She was living at home, and I was in my own home. I brought it to her, and she goes, oh my God. And in that moment that she told me this, I felt the energy shift in him. And I said, this was it. I said, this is his opportunity to begin to make amends before he leaves this earth. And sure enough, he started. And amazingly enough, of course, he never makes it out of jail. Why? They're going to release him after 12 years. He only got 12 years. But what happened was 9/11 happened. And my father was petrified that one of us either got hurt or was in the city or whatever. He calls the house and he talks normal. Now, whenever he called from there, it's the first time I ever heard my father on the phone. Whenever he would call from there, he would still talk like he wasn't 100%, right? Clear as a bell. They get him on tape. Now he's called several times, clear as a bell. So they realize there's no insanity here. He's not faking anything, right? So the government says to him, listen, unless you cop to who you are, we're going after the family for obstruction of justice. And that ended everything. And he said, no, I'll give you everything you want, meaning about himself. He would never talk about another human being, but himself. And that's what kept him there. And 2005, I think it was, we got the phone call and that he passed during the night from congestive heart failure. Which, you know, there's a theory that they fucked with his medicine. Neither here nor there. He gets into the spirit world, and who does he contact first? One of my friends who's a medium. And within 2 minutes, I get the phone call, you know. Or no, I called her. And I said, my father passed. She goes, I already know he's here. I said, holy shit. And he said to me, the first words out of his mouth was, go take care of your mother. I dropped everything. I was in my office. I dropped everything. He said to me, I'll be back to speak to you personally. I go to my mother. We go through the whole bout of, you know, getting him cremated and settled. And 2005, I wait 7 years to publish my book because out of respect for him and my mother. But not too long after that, he contacts 3 different mediums to get to me. And I said to them, because they called me and they said, look, he's like a bull in a china shop. He's giving me the messages. I got to give him to you. And they had to kind of back him off because he would come to them during the night while they were sleeping. So I end up then having a conversation with him. This is the first time I know I'm a medium, okay, talking to my dad. And he says to me, apologizing profusely, I was wrong. I did this, I did that, you were right. I made so many mistakes. I hurt your mother so bad. In the beginning, he would never admit that he hurt any of us, only my mother. But I see now what I did, and he looked at what's called your life review when you get in the spirit world, and he realized he took it way too far. His ego got the best of him, and he admitted it, all of it. And I said to him, I know. I said, but actually none of that matters at this point. I said, you are where you are, and the fact that you realize it and want to make amends is good enough for me. And he begged me at that point if he could work with me in what I do. And I said, what do you mean? And he says, I want to come through and help people, whoever needs me. Now, I've worked with many in that lifestyle throughout the course, and anybody that he felt he needed to help, he would come. So I said, well, that was like an offer I couldn't refuse. And I said, absolutely. And so we've been two peas in a pod since he's passed. He's been phenomenal at coming and helping me with people. When I'm on stage and I'm talking about my story, or when I'm doing interviews like this, I feel him, he comes through me. It's so funny. He laughs every time people ask me, where's the money? And he's hysterical because he knows we live like normal people. We don't live like anything other than normal people. Like, there is no money. Wherever it was, whoever had it, it's not with us. So he laughs at that. And I say to him, it's not funny. I said, but it's okay. But that's really like the first question people ask. I'm so shocked at that. And then we go on to, people want to know the intimate details of things. So, this is me telling everybody that you can get through anything in life. You put your mind to it, you follow your own truth, and you allow your soul to lead you and not your ego, and you got it made. You can do whatever you want. I'm proof of it. My father's even proof of it because he changed before he left this earth. And I also tell people, even if they don't change here, there's that place that they can change in the spirit world. So I teach people to connect to their loved ones, because it's not that I don't love being a medium, but people want to speak to their own. They don't necessarily want to speak to me. So I teach them how to get to that point, because we all have these skills that we're born with. It really depends on how far you want to take it. So it warms my heart. It gives me such a sense of, gratitude that I can help as many people either speak to their loved ones, be a conduit for them, whatever it is. But I tell people all the time, live your truth. It's the only way to go.
Amazing.
Thank you.
It's a great story.
Yeah, and there was so much more. But I don't know how much more you want to hear.
Part 2.
Part 2, right?
Next time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rita.
Oh, absolutely.